Hi, welcome to my messy kitchen. Today I'm going to talk about stretching watercolor paper and why I stretch it. So I'm going to show you the things that you're going to need, and then we'll talk about each item, and then I'll show you how I stretch mine. There's a lot of videos on YouTube about how to stretch paper, so this one's not the only one. You can find several different artists who teach you how to do that. This is just how I like to do it and the supplies that I use. So let me get the camera adjusted and I'll show you what I do. Okay, so first off, what you're going to need is supplies. So I always buy my watercolor paper. This is Arches. This is cold pressed paper. And you see it's like a huge piece of paper. I'm going to cut this down before I stretch it. But I buy it in these big pieces. It's about $8.50, and then I cut it myself to whatever size I want. Usually 11 by 11 by 14. This is a 22 by 28 piece of paper, and so I can get 4 of 11 by 14 pieces, or I can do 8 by 10s, where I can cut it down to whatever size I want. So I'm going to cut this in a minute, but this is what my paper looks like. It's got a watermark, says Arches, and it's 100% cotton. So when you stretch paper, you're going to want a 100% cotton paper, because otherwise it's not going to work very well. The other thing you need, obviously, is stapler and staples. I know my stapler is about out. And then you need something to stretch it on. So there's a couple options. So before I bought this, I used this kind of thing. So I would take cardboard and I covered it in packing tape so that it did not absorb water, so that when I do my washes, I'm not having to deal with the cardboard absorbing water and then not drying, because that kind of messes with the paint as you're painting. But this works really well. You can tape stuff down to it, and you can staple to it. The only problem with the staples is that you go through and the staples bend on the back, obviously because it's fairly thin, and so you have to remove it. It takes a little bit more time and energy, but it's not bad, and it's a really cheap way to have a board. And you can get cardboard in like whatever size you want. So to have a board that's the right size, and I like my board to be just a little bit bigger than whatever painting I'm painting. So I have several sizes of these that I still use. The other thing that I purchased recently, or not recently, about a year ago, it's Gator board, and this is like styrofoam board, only it's a lot thicker and it's a lot denser, and the surface either side, you can paint on either side, is a harder surface. So when I staple, I'm not compressing the styrofoam. The other nice thing, whereas this one, the staples on the back bend over so they're not poking into anything. This one, the staples go in and stay straight, so they're really easy to pop out with like a palette knife or any kind of knife or whatever, something that's not going to damage your paper. And they're also waterproof, so you're not having to tape. Like this one, I had a packing tape where you could contact paper that, but this one, it's, you know, I don't have to worry about the water. I don't have to worry about anything messing with it. And as you can see, I don't know if you can see the video, I've stapled a lot of different size papers in here, clear out here, and it works really good. It's very durable material. The reasons that I like to stretch my paper, I do not like the buckling that happens when you tape it down. So if I took this paper like it is and taped it down to this board with just regular masking tape, what would happen is, as I put my washes on and got it wet, the paper is going to try to expand, and yet you've got it secured down all around the edges, and so it creates that warping and buckling as you wet the paper. And obviously when it dries, it kind of shrinks back down a little bit, but not totally. So the stretching process, you get it wet so that it's expanded, and then we're going to staple it down, and then it's going to dry, which is going to shrink it, but it's going to hold it. So it's really tight when it's stapled down, and then when it gets wet, it's already been expanded to its max capacity, and it's not going to expand beyond that the second time. So you get almost zero warping and buckling. If the warping and buckling doesn't bother you, that's one thing, and sometimes you can use, you know, if you have like a little tiny piece, it's not that big a deal, but I don't like the warping and buckling, and I don't like how it looks when I'm done, because it leaves little puddles and it's harder to control the paint. The other option is to do blocks of paper. Arches makes blocks that are glued all the way around the edges. Those are nice. I don't like to go any bigger than about an 8 by 8 with those, but I love painting with those, and they're great to travel and take with me when I go. But So I'm going to go cut my paper, and then I will come back and I will show you how I wet it and then staple it down. Okay, so I cut my paper, and you'll notice I cut it in half, and I'm leaving this one big just in case I want to do like 3 pieces or cut it in half again, I don't know. But then these are my two 11 by 14-ish pieces. I misspoke, this is 22 by 30, so you're going to get an 11 by 15. But with these little ripply edges, you kind of have to cut off a little bit. So that's the big piece. Here's the little smaller. The other thing I was going to show you was the blocks. So this is a block of paper. It's glued all around the edges. There's one spot where you can get a palette knife in to remove it, so it removes nicely. This is a cold press. This is a hot press. Anyway, they're really nice because they don't warp and they don't buckle very much either. So let me move these things, and then I will show you what I did. And I got to move my camera. Okay, so here we are at my kitchen sink. And I just have dirty dishes again in the sink. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run this under water. Now you see how, I mean, you can hear it. It's kind of like a saw blade. Anyway, it's pretty stiff. And so what I'm going to do is run it through here until it becomes more like cloth-like, less floppy. And I just use cool water, not a lot, but I just start running it under the water, all over the paper. And I do one side, flip it over, do the other side. And the one thing you want to be careful of is that you're not stretching like these points where you're folding as the paper gets softer. And it takes a minute, but you can feel it start to get softer. But you want to get both sides. And you can see you can't hear it. Well, I guess you can a little bit, but it's not quite the same, and it's getting a lot more flexible. It doesn't hold its shape as well. It's about there. Okay. So you don't want to do it so long that it starts to fall apart. You see how that's more like cloth-like and less stiff? This is about what I want, and I wanted to let the water drain off a little bit, and then we're going to take it over here to our board and lay it down. So I'm going to move my camera back. Okay, so I have my paper. It's dripping a little bit wet. It's good. And then I'm going to set it down, and it kind of suctions down. So make sure it's where you want it, like even. I like it to be square and even, whatever, if that's not something that bothers you. But I like it to be square and even so that I can, I'm going to show you at the end how I tape it too. So take your stapler. It's got to be a stapler that will open up. And you're just going to go on the edge. I usually come in just a little bit. And then this gator board is hard, so you got to make sure the staple goes in. And then I hold my finger so that it's kind of a gauge for the rest of it. That's the other reason why it's nice to be square. And then because the gator board is hard, it will mess up some of your staples sometimes. And you want to go fairly close together. And make sure that even with your finger as a gauge that you're on your paper still. You might have to adjust. Whoops, see there's a lot. I usually end up with half a dozen or more bent staples. But anyway, I'm going to continue on all the way around, and then I will show you the finished product. Okay, so all the staples are around. There's one that I may need to fix. One thing you need to be really careful of is that you don't mar the painting surface of your paper. So, you know, like these staples that were, I'm going to show you, there was a fair amount that bent over funky because this board is actually fairly hard. But you want to make sure when you do that the stapler doesn't dig into your painting surface. The other thing to notice, there's a couple of bubbles, but those are going to dry out and they're not going to be there when I paint. they'll stretch, you know, as the paper stretches, it'll go away and it won't come back. So from at this point in time, if you just want to let it air dry, it'll take about 24 hours, or well, probably about 12 hours, but I usually do it like the night before I want to start painting or drawing. And then, but if you want to speed up the process, you can hair dry it, and that'll get it to dry a lot faster. The thing to be careful with when you hair dry it is that you're drying the top of the surface first, and so let it cool down and touch it. And if it still is fairly cool to the touch, it means that the bottom is not dry. Do not draw on it or paint on it at that point. It needs to be dry all the way through. So I'm going to go and let this dry, and then I will show you my final step in prepping my paper for painting. Okay, so I went and dried this with my hair dryer, and a couple of tips for drying it with your hair dryer. You don't want to hold it in one spot and let that spot dry and then move on to the next one. You want to kind of just keep it moving and dry the whole thing at the same time so it's shrinking at the same rate. Also, when you're done blow drying it, let it sit for a couple minutes or wave it in the air to cool it off, and then feel it. And if it's cool to the touch still, like not room temperature type temperature, it's probably not dry on the underside. And if you're not painting on it immediately, it'll dry. But if you're going to paint on it immediately or start your sketches, you want to have that totally dry, so go back and dry it some more. Also, before you tape it down, you kind of want it totally dry. The other thing, you can tell that it's been stretching fairly good because you can see that the edges are pulling up now, so it's stretching the paper pretty good, and that means that it's been properly stretched. So the last thing I like to do is put tape around the edges, just because I like that clean white edge. It's pretty easy, and I always try to cover the staples. And I don't measure. You can measure if you're really worried about it. I just kind of eyeball it from edge to edge. And if I really got it on my board straight, then it will be straight across there. Obviously, I didn't get this one on the board as straight as I thought I did. But press that down pretty good, and that covers up my staple lines and gives me that nice straight edge that I like. You know, it's fun to peel the tape off when you're done with the painting and see the finished product. It gives it a little bit more of a finished look. I saw in a book recently a different way to stretch paper that I tried, and I did not like it. I reviewed that on my blog if you want to read about that other technique, and if you would like to try it, maybe you'll have more success with it than I did, but I did not like it. You can get on my website, stephanieritchieart.com, and you can read about that on my blog. Usually it's on a computer, it's on the right hand side. On your phone you may have to scroll down to find the blogs, but and there's a lot of each week I do one art blog, and then I do a couple of just my opinion blogs on a whole variety of subjects. So if you want to subscribe to that on my website, that would be great too. And on YouTube, if you want to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. This year I'm going to try to have more painting tutorials and things like this, just informational things for you to enjoy, hopefully. So there's how I prepare my paper for painting. And I hope you enjoyed that video, and I hope that helped you understand kind of the purpose of stretching paper and how to do it for yourself.